This project is for fifth graders that I have all day long, and we are in Kansas, and this is part of our social studies curriculum. We are ready to do a Revolutionary War timeline project. Our big idea is we will be creating a timeline with important information about the Revolutionary War with multimedia resources. We're going to be looking for important figures in history, the location of the event, a specific date, or at least month and year, along with a brief description of the event and an appropriate picture. I want us to learn about the important factors for the British and for the Patriots. So now that you have a little idea of the things that we have, you're going to be taking notes over the Revolutionary War as we read through our textbook and watch some videos and find some resources online. And so you're going to be taking that knowledge and transferring it into a timeline. Here is the rubric that you're going to be graded on. This rubric will be printed out for you so you have it available until it is graded. You can see that there are 5 main elements: date, important person, description of event, location of event, picture or graphic, and then I do want that spelling and grammar to be perfect or almost perfect. In order to get the highest grade, to get that 4, you're going above and beyond just the minimum requirements. The minimum requirements are having 10 events, so that is something to take notice on. Those are the 5 things again. You are going to be given multiple opportunities to gather this information. We also will be creating a rough draft before we have the final draft where we go online to create it. You will have a chance to share your work and present it to the class. So if you think about a timeline, it's in the order that it happened: first, second, third, last, etc. When we have everything organized, we are going to take our information and our drafts, and we're going to come to this Read, Write, Think site, and this will provide us with a place to organize our timeline. It also allows us to print it and add the appropriate graphics to it.
We're
going to watch a video with a gentleman who has some fast-paced talking about the Revolutionary War. I have made some editing with it so that we can miss some of the first part and miss some of the last part. So here is our video.
I'm going to start with the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, which, as you will recall from last week, was 1, expensive, and 2, a victory for the British, including British subjects living in America who now had more land and therefore more money. Right, so in 1765, the British government was like, hey, since we went into this debt to get you all this new land, we trust that you won't mind if we pass the Stamp Act, in which we place a fancy stamp on your documents, newspapers, playing cards, etc., and in return, you give us money. Well, it turns out the colonists weren't so keen on this, not so much because the tax was high, but because they had no direct representation in the parliament that had levied the tax. And plus, they were cranky about the crown keeping large numbers of British troops in the colonies even after the end of the 7 Years' War. And then the British government was like, "You are inadequately grateful," and the colonists were like, "Shut up, we hate you," and the British government was like, "As long as you live under our roof, you live by our rules," and so on. But eventually the British backed down and repealed the Stamp Act. The repeal inspired a line of commemorative teapots, thereby beginning America's storied tradition of worthless collectible ceramics. But in the end, this only emboldened the colonists when the British tried to put new taxes on the Americans in the form of the Townshend Act. These led to further protests and boycotts, and most importantly, more organization among the colonists. The protests escalated. 1770 saw the Boston Massacre, which with its sum total of 5 dead was perhaps the least massacre-y massacre of all time. And in 1773, a bunch of colonists dumped about $1 million worth of tea into Boston Harbor in protest of British government decisions that actually would have made British tea cheaper. Oh, it's time for the open letter? Ah, oh, that did not go well. An open letter to tea. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment today. Oh, it's a gigantic tea bag. See what flavor it is. Bitter tyranny variety. Dear T, like all Americans who love justice and freedom, I hate you. But I understand you're quite popular in the UK, where the East India Company would periodically go to war for you. But what fascinates me about you, T, I mean, aside from the fact that people choose to drink you when there are great American refreshments available like Mountain Dew, is that even though you're stereotypically English, you're not English. It's Chinese or Burmese or Indian, no one really knows, but it's definitely not English. You didn't even have tea until like the 1660s. Posers. Best wishes, John Green. So the Boston Tea Party led to further British crackdowns, and then mobilization of colonial militias, and then Paul Revere, and then actual war. But you can hear all about that stuff on like TV miniseries. I want to focus on one of the ways that colonists protested unfair taxation. Let's go to the thought bubble. As previously noted, the English crown benefited tremendously from the import of consumer goods to the American colonies, and one of the most effective ways American colonists could protest taxation without representation was by boycotting British products. In order to enforce these boycotts, the protesters created committees of correspondence, which spread information about who was and was not observing the boycotts, and these committees also could coerce non-compliers into compliance, which is to say that they were creating and enforcing policy. Kind of like a government does. The Maryland Committee of Correspondence, in fact, was instrumental in setting up the first Continental Congress, which convened to coordinate a response to the fighting that started in 1775. This was back when Congresses did things, by the way. It was awesome. Anyway, the Continental Congress is most famous for drafting and approving the Declaration of Independence. No, thought bubble, that's the Will Smith vehicle Independence Day. I mean the Declaration of Independence. Right, that one. It's not your fault. You guys are Canadian. You've never declared independence. Worth noting, by the way, that the Congress edited out more than a quarter of Jefferson's original declaration, and he forever after insisted that they'd, quote, mangled it. Anyway, I would argue the heavy lifting of the American Revolution was already done by the Declaration. In truth, by the time the shooting started, most of the colonists were already self-governing and had developed a sense of themselves as something separate and different from Great Britain, as evidenced by these committees of correspondence, which functioned as shadow governments, eventually reaching out to foreign governments, establishing an espionage network, tarring and feathering loyalists and royal officials, which, by the way, is incredibly painful and dangerous to the victim, and even recruiting physicians to tell American men that drinking British tea would make them weak and effeminate. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Now, despite all this, about 20% of colonists remained loyal to Great Britain throughout the war, especially in the major cities that Britain occupied. Also, lots of slaves continued to support the British, especially after Britain promised that any slaves who fought with them would be freed. And it's worth noting that while we generally celebrate the Revolution and see it as a step toward justice and equality, the people who most needed the protection of a government might have been better off and more free if Britain had won, especially.
So now it is time for you to show what you know. When you think about this activity, please understand that I am trying to make you think creatively about the Revolutionary War and use your creativity in your timeline. I'm also giving you some multimedia experiences and letting you show your information in a different way besides just paper and pencil. My final reflection for this assignment is the way that I was able to incorporate a new rubric through Google Forms, incorporating Orange Slice that will also help me grade the rubrics. Using Powtoons was quite simple. Finding the Ed puzzle and being able to edit is pretty amazing, and then incorporating read, write, think into my lesson.